Maybe if the Congresswoman spent less time lecturing and more time listening, she'd actually understand the Constitution she quotes so often. Marco Rubio's words dropped into the hearing like shards of glass, clean, sharp, calculated to cut. The room reacted the way it always does to a political cheap shot, a few forced chuckles from allies, a low murmur of discomfort from everyone else. The laughter didn't last. It never does when cruelty comes dressed as comedy. Rubio leaned back, self-satisfied, wearing the easy grin of a man convinced he'd just landed his viral clip. His pen spun lazily between his fingers, his gaze sweeping across the committee as if to confirm that everyone had heard him, that everyone had seen the moment, and they had. But the cameras, those unblinking truth, had already found a different frame. Jasmine Crockett's face. She didn't blink, didn't shift, didn't even raise an eyebrow. Her expression was unreadable, a calm so deliberate it almost seemed to absorb the insult and dissolve it in real time. Around her, aides froze. Someone coughed, too loudly. One reporter in the back row whispered, "Oh no," because everyone in that room could feel what was about to happen. Rubio mistook her silence for retreat. He leaned forward again, emboldened. "I mean no disrespect," he said, the kind of phrase always followed by more of it. "But passion isn't a substitute for principle." He smiled, satisfied with his phrasing, waiting for another ripple of laughter that didn't come. Jasmine's pen rested perfectly still against her notebook, her gaze fixed on him, patient, assessing surgical. She didn't rush to fill the silence. She let it stretch, heavy, uncomfortable, commanding. For the first time, Rubio looked unsure. The air in the chamber had changed. The smirk faltered, just slightly, because everyone watching, both in that room and across the country, could sense it, the shift in power, the quiet before the reckoning. He thought it was just another laugh line until she started speaking. The morning began with the sound of cameras clicking, the kind of sound that tells you the hearing isn't really about policy anymore. It was the Senate-House Joint Committee on Federal Ethics Reform. But no one in the packed chamber believed that's what they'd actually come to see. The real draw wasn't the agenda, it was the clash. Marco Rubio entered the room like a man stepping onto a stage. His aides trailed behind him, murmuring notes about optics and sound. He didn't need reminding. He knew how to perform for the camera, how to pause mid-sentence, how to smirk just enough to look confident but never cruel, how to command attention without appearing to demand it. To him, hearings weren't about governance. They were theater. Across the room, Jasmine Crockett saw something very different. She wasn't there to perform. She was there to work. She had her binder open before the chair even called the meeting to order. Tabs marked, citations highlighted, questions prepared. She knew the stakes, not just for policy, but for perception. Every hearing, every exchange, every raised eyebrow could become a headline. And for women like her, especially women of color, every moment on camera was another test of composure. The topic on the table, ethics reform, should have been straightforward. But everyone knew it wasn't. It was a proxy war over integrity itself. Who still had it, who had lost it, and who pretended to have it for the sake of applause. The air was thick with tension long before the first question was asked. As the discussion began, it was clear how differently these two figures viewed the world. Rubio spoke with the smooth assurance of a man who'd been rehearsing for years, his voice rising and falling in rhythm with the flashes of the cameras. He smiled often, not because he was amused, but because he understood the optics of dominance. That charm, when timed right, could humiliate more effectively than anger. Jasmine didn't smile. She didn't need to. She spoke with precision, the quiet tone of someone who knew that substance didn't need decoration. Every word was chosen carefully, every sentence weighted. Where Rubio reached for applause, she reached for accountability. At first, it seemed like an uneven match. He had seniority, stature, and the full force of his practiced persona. She had facts, conviction, and composure. The power imbalance felt obvious, even inevitable. The cameras leaned toward him, expecting him to steer the exchange the way he always did, with that blend of smug charisma and rhetorical dominance. But then something began to shift. Each time she spoke, Rubio interrupted gently at first, then more boldly. Each time he laughed, she grew quieter, not in retreat, but in restraint. The audience noticed, so did the cameras. The smiles in the room began to fade as people realized this wasn't just a clash of perspectives. It was a clash of worlds. On one side, entitlement, performance, and polished condescension. On the other, focus, discipline, and authenticity. As the minutes passed, the stakes became clear. This hearing wasn't about ethics reform anymore. It was about credibility, who deserved to define what integrity meant in public service. Every exchange felt heavier than the last, charged with the tension of history and hierarchy colliding on live television. Rubio saw the moment as another opportunity to dominate the narrative, to turn his opponent into a punchline for the evening news. He didn't realize that the audience, tired of arrogance, hungry for honesty, was watching something else entirely. The nation wasn't looking for the loudest voice anymore. It was waiting for the clearest one, and Marco Rubio was the kind of politician who knew how to look composed even while throwing punches. His entire brand was built on the illusion of civility, the calm tone, the polished posture, the half-smile that said, "I'm in control here." He spoke softly enough to seem reasonable, but every word carried a trace of calculation, a blade hidden in a compliment. Over the years, he'd mastered the art of political theater. To the cameras, he was the picture of professionalism, respectful, measured, disciplined. But those who'd sat across from him in hearings knew better. Beneath the veneer of charm was something colder, a sharpness he'd learned to conceal behind humor. He didn't shout, he didn't curse, he didn't break decorum. He didn't need to. His insults came dressed in the language of politeness, every jab delivered with a grin. That was the trick. His entire strategy depended on contrast, to look collected while making others seem emotional, to appear rational while provoking chaos. He'd lean back in his chair, smile that camera-ready smile, and deliver lines designed to sting without ever raising his voice. "With all due respect" was his favorite dagger. "If I may correct, my colleague" was the cue that another rhetorical ambush was coming, and it worked. For years, that method had carried him through tense debates and uncomfortable scandals. He'd become the Senate's version of the polite heckler, the man who could mock you to your face and make it sound like mentorship. Reporters called him disciplined. His supporters called him classy. But to those who looked past the gloss, it was obvious. Rubio's confidence wasn't strength. It was armor carefully polished, desperately maintained, and cracking more with every passing year. He loved to talk about unity. It was one of his favorite words. He could weave it into any speech, any interview, as though saying it often enough might make it true. But his version of unity was conditional harmony so long as he remained the conductor. The moment someone else challenged his tempo, the smile tightened, the eyes narrowed, and the mask slipped just enough to reveal the insecurity underneath. That's what made Jasmine Crockett's presence such a threat. She wasn't combative. She was calm. She didn't match his tone. She held her own. And in Rubio's world, that balance, especially from a younger, black congresswoman, unafraid to meet him, word for word, disrupted the narrative he'd perfected. Her very composure was an offense to his ego. He needed her flustered. He needed her off rhythm. Because if she stayed poised, she'd expose what he spent years hiding, that his power depended entirely on control. Rubio approached hearings like a chess player who believed the board belonged to him. Every smirk, every pause, every neatly phrased quip was rehearsed. He didn't just prepare arguments, he prepared optics. The angle of his head, the deliberate chuckle, the gentle shake of disappointment. He was fluent in the body language of superiority. But like all performers, he had tells, the subtle shift in his eyes when someone interrupted his rhythm, the forced smile when laughter didn't follow a joke, the impatient shuffle of papers when he realized the audience wasn't buying what he was selling. These were the cracks in the illusion, the signs that the confidence wasn't confidence at all, but performance anxiety disguised as poise. And lately, the act wasn't landing the way it used to. The country was changing. The audience was changing. People no longer cheered for arrogance packaged as intellect. They wanted authenticity, and Rubio's brand of controlled condescension was starting to look outdated. Yet, he clung to it anyway, believing that the same smug formula that carried him through the past would carry him forever. That's why the moment with Jasmine mattered. It wasn't just another clash between lawmakers. It was a collision between eras, between the old politics of ego and the new politics of empathy. When he mocked her, he thought he was asserting dominance. In reality, he was revealing dependence on the cameras, on the laughter, on the illusion that people still mistook smugness for strength. Because Marco Rubio didn't truly crave victory. He craved validation. Every polished sentence, every well-timed grin was an echo of insecurity he never resolved. He mocked others not because he disdained them, but because he needed them to prove that he was still relevant, still powerful, still the sharpest voice in the room. But Jasmine Crockett didn't give him what he wanted. She didn't react. She didn't take the bait. And for a man who thrived on being the center of every exchange, her calm was his undoing. That day, his contradictions caught up with him. The man who preached respect disrespected his colleague. The man who championed unity humiliated a fellow public servant. The man who prided himself on control lost it the moment his target refused to play along. And as the hearing continued, the cameras that had once adored him began to linger elsewhere on the woman sitting across from him. Silent, steady, waiting. The audience watching at home felt it before he did. The tide turning, the performance slipping, the pedestal cracking. Marco Rubio thought he was untouchable. But the truth was simpler, sadder, and far more cinematic. He had mistaken smugness for strength, and the reckoning was already underway. That's when Marco Rubio made his biggest mistake. Before Jasmine Crockett ever sat behind a congressional microphone, before her words could silence a room or her composure could command a nation's attention, she was simply a girl raised to believe that character was stronger than circumstance. Her story began far from the marbled walls of Washington, in the kind of neighborhood where you learned early how to make your voice matter without raising it. Her mother, a teacher, taught her that patience was not passivity. It was power waiting for the right moment. Her father, a working man who never complained about long days, taught her that discipline wasn't about pride, it was about purpose. From them, she learned to move with quiet certainty, to let her work speak before her words did. When Jasmine became a lawyer, she didn't chase status or headlines. She chose the hard cases, the forgotten ones, families evicted without notice, teens overcharged for mistakes that others would have walked away from, veterans tangled in red tape. Her office wasn't glamorous, but it was alive with purpose. The cracked floors, the crowded files, the smell of paper and coffee, all of it was part of the fight. In those courtrooms, she learned the art of emotional control. She faced judges who dismissed her, opposing counsel who talked over her, and jurors who doubted her before she spoke. But Jasmine didn't yield. She learned to let arrogance talk itself into exhaustion, to let the truth outlast the noise. When others mistook her calm for compliance, she smiled, because she knew composure could unsettle even the most confident adversary. Her victories weren't always dramatic. They were quiet, steady, earned, and each one built the foundation for the woman who would later walk into Congress, the woman who understood that dignity was not a strategy, it was an identity. When Jasmine entered politics, she carried that same ethic with her. She wasn't drawn by power. She was driven by purpose. She believed in the slow, deliberate work of justice, while others rehearsed speeches for the cameras. She spent nights in her office studying bills, line by line, highlighting inconsistencies, preparing questions designed not to embarrass but to expose. Her team knew her ritual. Before a hearing, she would sit alone with her notes, headphones in, tuning out the chatter. She didn't listen to music. She listened to silence. That stillness was her armor. She would visualize every possible scenario, interruptions, mockery, condescension, and prepare her responses not as retorts, but as precision strikes. Every word she spoke would have intention behind it. Every pause would serve a purpose. Her emotional intelligence was her greatest weapon. She could read a room like an attorney reads a jury, gauging every facial twitch, every breath of impatience, every attempt to provoke. She understood something that many of her peers didn't. People reveal themselves most when they're trying to hide control. And that understanding made her dangerous. Not because she was loud, but because she didn't need to be in an environment dominated by bluster and ego. Jasmine Crockett represented something unfamiliar, a new kind of strength that didn't need to announce itself. When others performed for the cameras, she performed for the record. She believed that truth didn't need theatrics. It just needed space to breathe. And she had learned long ago how to make space. Even when others tried to take it away, every time someone talked over her, she'd pause, wait, and then resume exactly where she left off, as if their interruption had never existed. Every time someone mischaracterized her words, she'd calmly correct them, not with anger, but with clarity. It wasn't about ego, it was about integrity. Her composure came from scars. No one saw the endless hours fighting for clients who couldn't pay, the late nights defending principles that others abandoned, the exhaustion of being underestimated again and again. She knew what it meant to be talked down to. She knew what it felt like to be doubted, but she also knew what it felt like to win, not through volume, but through precision. That's why, when she sat across from Marco Rubio in that hearing, she was ready long before he opened his mouth. She had rehearsed the scene 100 times in her head, not with him, but with every version of him she'd ever met. The teacher who told her she was too opinionated, the client who didn't trust her judgment until the verdict came in, the colleague who tried to take credit for her work. She had faced them all, and every encounter had taught her the same truth. Arrogance, mistakes, kindness for weakness until it learns otherwise. Her aides saw it in her the morning of the hearing. She was calm, almost unnervingly so. She reviewed her notes one last time, took a slow sip of coffee, and smiled faintly. "They'll come for me," she said quietly, "but I've already written the ending." They didn't know what she meant, not yet. When she entered the room, she carried herself with quiet authority. No fanfare, no entourage, just a stack of documents, a pen, and that steady, unbreakable stillness that always preceded her sharpest moments. She didn't posture, didn't over-prepare her facial expressions. She simply listened to the murmurs, to the laughter, to the arrogance. And when Rubio made his first joke at her expense, she didn't even flinch. Because Jasmine Crockett didn't fight battles to prove herself anymore. She fought them to remind the world what real strength looks like. Her calm wasn't emptiness. It was fire, under glass, controlled, focused. In waiting for the right moment to ignite, she had weathered arrogance before, but never wrapped in such practiced politeness. The exchange began with civility, or what passed for it. Marco Rubio adjusted his tie, leaned toward the microphone, and smiled that perfectly rehearsed senator's smile. "Congresswoman Crockett," he said smoothly, "I admire your passion, truly. But passion without perspective can be, well, dangerous." It was the kind of remark designed to sound like praise while landing like a slap. A few forced chuckles drifted through the chamber, polite, nervous, hollow. Jasmine didn't move. She simply nodded once, eyes steady, as though storing the words away like evidence. Rubio continued, his tone dripping with that same polished condescension. "I know you're relatively new to this process, he added, and it takes time to understand how these things work. But let me clarify. For your benefit, he never finished the sentence. The chair's gavel struck softly, a reminder to maintain decorum, but it didn't stop him. He smiled wider. The mask of politeness stretched thin. Apologies, he said. I just assumed we were all here to discuss policy, not poetry. There it was, the first open insult, the kind that pretends to be humor but carries the weight of dismissal, the kind that every woman in that room had heard in one form or another. Jasmine didn't react. Not yet. She shifted slightly in her seat, fingers resting on her notepad, expression.com. The restraint was deliberate, powerful. Rubio took it as weakness. He leaned in again, emboldened. You have a way with words, Congresswoman, he said, chuckling softly. But words aren't the same as wisdom. Another uneasy ripple of laughter. Jasmine's pen tapped once, the only sound she made. You see, Rubio went on. Governing is about understanding nuance, not emotion. It's about knowing when to listen to experience. The word experience hung in the air like a weapon. He said it slowly, savoring it, as though his years in office made his arguments immune to challenge. But those watching, both in the room and on live broadcast, saw what he didn't. The way Jasmine's posture changed, almost imperceptibly. Shoulders back, chin lifted slightly, eyes narrowing, not in anger, but in focus. He kept talking, interrupting, smiling, talking over her when she tried to speak. Each time she opened her mouth, his voice cut across hers, louder, faster, laced with condescension, disguised as charm. I'll let you finish, but with respect. That's not accurate. Now, Congresswoman, let's not make this emotional. Each line, each interruption, layered the tension tighter. Reporters began to glance at one another, sensing the storm brewing beneath her composure. The viewers at home, those who'd followed Jasmine long enough to know what came next, began to lean forward. They'd seen this look before, but Rubio didn't. He laughed again, casually, as though unaware he was building the stage for his own undoing. It's admirable, he said, how confident you are, given your limited background in these matters. The insult was subtle, but everyone heard it. The air changed instantly. A hush rippled through the room. Even his allies shifted uncomfortably. Jasmine finally lifted her gaze, meeting his eyes directly for the first time. There was no visible anger, no raised voice, just that same steady calm. And yet, something in that stillness made Rubio falter. She spoke once, softly. Are you finished, Senator? It wasn't a question. It was a warning, but he didn't recognize it. He chuckled again, that practiced laugh he used when he thought he'd won the room. I suppose so, unless you'd like to turn this into another speech. Jasmine didn't blink. The pause that followed stretched too long, heavy enough that the cameras caught the shift. Her silence wasn't submission. It was suspense. For the first time all day, Rubio looked unsure. He straightened his papers, cleared his throat, as if to reclaim the rhythm. But the rhythm wasn't his anymore. The room had turned dot. Every viewer could feel it, that sharp, electric anticipation that comes before a moment history remembers. Jasmine Crockett, the picture of patience, had allowed arrogance to write its own indictment. He mistook her silence for surrender. And that was the last mistake he made. For a few seconds, it felt as if the room had frozen in time. Marco Rubio's laugh still echoed faintly, hollow and misplaced, as if even he wasn't sure it had landed the way he intended. Jasmine Crockett sat perfectly still, hands folded neatly on the table, her eyes steady on him. The silence between them wasn't empty, it pulsed with energy, heavy with anticipation. Then, slowly, she reached for her microphone. Senator, she said softly, her tone even, but edged with steel. I've been called many things in my life, passionate, opinionated, outspoken, and I've learned to take all of it as a compliment. But what I will not accept, not from you or anyone, is mockery disguised as mentorship. Her words slid through the air, like a blade wrapped in velvet. The audience aides, reporters, even staffers behind her, went still. Rubio blinked, the smile still frozen on his face. But it no longer fit. She continued, voice calm, deliberate, her cadence slow enough that every syllable carried weight. I came here to debate policy, not personality. I came here to talk about ethics, not egos. And I can promise you, Senator, I know the Constitution just as well as you do, perhaps better, because I don't treat it like a prop. The faintest gasp escaped someone in the gallery. Rubio straightened, his smirk flickering. Jasmine's tone never wavered. You like to talk about experience, she said, eyes narrowing slightly, as if years and power automatically translate into wisdom. But if wisdom were measured in tenure, then history wouldn't be filled with men who sat in seats like yours, mistaking longevity for legacy. Each word hit with surgical precision, no shouting, no anger, just the unrelenting rhythm of truth spoken without fear. Rubio opened his mouth, perhaps to interject, but Jasmine lifted a hand. You've interrupted me 3 times now. I think you can manage silence once. A ripple of laughter, real laughter, broke through the tension, followed by an immediate hush. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply continued, her tone smooth as marble. You say I'm emotional, Senator, but emotion is what drives people to serve. You call it passion. I call it purpose. and I'd rather be moved by conviction than trapped by calculation." The line hung there, shimmering in the air. Rubio shifted again, his fingers tapping against the desk. The arrogance in his posture had softened, replaced by something else, discomfort. Jasmine leaned forward slightly, the light catching her face. Her voice lowered, softer now, but sharper for it. "What you call passion, I call persistence. What you mock as inexperience is exactly what brought me here. The belief that government should still belong to people who haven't forgotten what it means to struggle." Every head in the room turned toward her. Even the chair, usually stoic, sat motionless. She had the floor now, and the entire building seemed to know it. "I've listened to you for years," she continued, mocking, minimizing, calling that leadership. "You hide behind politeness, but your words betray you. You use charm to cushion cruelty, and when someone calls it out, you smile like it's strategy. But it's not, it's cowardice." Rubio's jaw tensed. The cameras zoomed in, catching the faint flush creeping up his neck. Jasmine's voice rose just slightly, not in volume, but in command. "You can interrupt me, you can belittle me, but you can't erase what I represent. Because I don't speak just for myself. I speak for everyone who's ever been talked over and decided to keep talking anyway." The silence that followed was thick, electric. Reporters stopped typing. Phones stopped buzzing. The entire chamber seemed to inhale and hold its breath. "Senator," she said finally, pausing long enough for him to meet her eyes. "You laugh because you think this is about winning the moment. But I'm not here for a moment. I'm here for the truth." The words rang through the chamber, heavy with conviction. Rubio's smirk was gone now. His face had tightened, eyes darting briefly toward the camera as if seeking escape. But there was nowhere to go, not in a room filled with witnesses. Not in a world that would replay this moment again and again. Jasmine's tone softened again, almost sympathetic. "You can laugh all you want, Senator," she said, every word deliberate, every pause intentional, "but history isn't laughing with you." The line landed like thunder. A gasp, then silence. Total, absolute silence. Rubio froze, staring at her across the desk, eyes wide, the practiced charm gone. For the first time all session, he had nothing to say. His hand twitched toward his notes, then stopped. The cameras caught it all. The quiet unraveling of a man unaccustomed to being humbled in public. Jasmine didn't move. She didn't lean back triumphantly, didn't gloat. She simply lowered her pen to her paper, jotting a note as if the entire exchange had been routine. The chair cleared their throat, trying to bring the session back to order, but the spell wasn't broken. The gallery remained silent. The staffers stared. The microphones buzzed faintly in the charged air. Even the sound of Rubio exhaling felt intrusive. She had dismantled him without raising her voice. Without theatrics, without venom, just truth, delivered with the kind of calm that turns composure into power. For years, Marco Rubio had built his reputation on confidence. But in that moment, confidence deserted him. What was left wasn't a senator in control, it was a man exposed. Jasmine looked up one last time, meeting his gaze with quiet finality. "Now," she said, "can we get back to the work the American people actually sent us here to do?" No one answered. They couldn't. The moment didn't end. It echoed. Through the cameras, through the hallways, through the nation watching on screens across living rooms and timelines, Rubio's smile. That trademark expression that had survived every scandal, every debate, every moment of scrutiny, had vanished. And in its place was something no strategist could spin, no soundbite could fix, no press release could undo. Silence, the kind of silence that only truth can leave behind. By the time the chamber lights dimmed and the microphones went silent, the moment had already escaped into the wild. Within minutes, the clip of Jasmine Crockett's final line, "You can laugh all you want, Senator, but history isn't laughing with you," was everywhere. Every phone in the hearing room buzzed at once. Producers called their editors. Reporters whispered to one another, "That's the headline." By nightfall, it wasn't just a congressional exchange anymore. It was a national event. Cable news aired the clip on a loop, dissecting it frame by frame. One anchor described it as a masterclass in moral authority. Another called it the moment dignity reclaimed the microphone. On primetime panels, political strategists replayed Jasmine's tone, her timing, her unshakable poise. They slowed it down to show the exact second Rubio's smirk disappeared. That blink, that flicker. When power slipped out of his hands and into hers, commentators who usually thrived on outrage found themselves quiet, almost reverent. One said softly, "She didn't destroy him. She revealed him." On late-night shows, comedians couldn't resist. They mimicked Rubio's mock laugh, then played Jasmine's response in full, letting the silence after it land like a punchline. But the laughter wasn't cruel this time, it was cathartic. People were laughing not at Rubio, but in relief that someone had finally stood up, clearly, calmly, and refused to be diminished. By morning, the clip had been viewed tens of millions of times. Podcasts called it the most satisfying moment in politics this year. On social media, it was the soundtrack of empowerment. Doctors, teachers, and entrepreneurs posted about it, drawing parallels to their own lives, the meetings where they'd been interrupted, the rooms where they'd been underestimated. Jasmine had become more than a public servant. She'd become a symbol. A teacher in Chicago tweeted, "I played it for my students." This is how you handle arrogance, not by yelling, but by staying grounded in truth, a CEO in Atlanta wrote. Every woman who's ever been talked over in a boardroom just exhaled. A young man from Houston posted simply, "She didn't just speak for women. She spoke for everyone tired of pretending arrogance is leadership." And the celebrities followed. Viola Davis called it a sermon in self-control. John Legend tweeted, "Grace under fire. Leadership in real time." Even political commentators who often disagreed with Jasmine publicly praised her tone. If more hearings sounded like this, maybe people would start trusting government again. Every outlet, every platform, every conversation, they all carried the same undercurrent. Respect, not just for what she said, but for how she said it. She hadn't raised her voice once. She hadn't insulted, exaggerated, or dramatized. She had simply let the truth breathe, and that made all the difference. Meanwhile, inside Rubio's office, panic was setting in. His staff scrambled to draft statements, each one worse than the last. Senator Rubio was simply engaging in good faith debate, one press release claimed, but no one believed it. Every attempt at spin only drew more attention to the clip, and to the way Jasmine's calm had made his confidence look childish. For a man who'd built a career on control, losing it so publicly was devastating. Reporters noted that he canceled his next media appearance. His allies stayed quiet, waiting for the storm to pass. But the storm had become a movement. Across the country, Jasmine's words were being printed on posters, t-shirts, and coffee mugs. Her image, leaning forward, eyes steady, voice measured, became the defining visual of a cultural moment. This, one headline read, is what leadership looks like. But beneath all the noise, something deeper was happening. People weren't just celebrating her comeback, they were reclaiming her message. Offices buzzed with conversations about respect. Parents showed their children the clip as an example of confidence without cruelty. Teachers wrote her quote on whiteboards beside words like integrity and composure. Asterisk, the reaction wasn't about politics anymore. It was about people seeing themselves, the ones who had been talked down to, laughed at, interrupted, and told to calm down. Jasmine had given them permission to stand tall again, to see grace not as submission, but as strength. And somewhere in all of it, amid the headlines, the tweets, the late-night applause, the larger truth emerged. Her restraint had done what outrage never could. It had reminded a weary nation that power without humility isn't leadership. It's noise. By the end of the week, polls showed a surge in her approval rating, but that was secondary. The real victory was quieter, deeper. Jasmine Crockett had become a mirror, reflecting back to America its hunger for authenticity, for kindness that didn't yield, for truth that didn't shout. Marco Rubio had gone searching for a viral moment. He found one. He just wasn't the hero of it. When the dust finally settled, the story stopped being about Marco Rubio and Jasmine Crockett. It became something bigger, a reflection of where America stands and what kind of leadership it still craves. Because in a time when outrage has become a performance and cruelty a brand, one woman reminded the nation that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it simply refuses to be shaken. Jasmine's composure was more than personal discipline. It was a declaration that civility isn't weakness, that dignity isn't naive, that restraint can be the sharpest form of defiance. Her words carried more weight precisely because she didn't fight fire with fire. She let arrogance burn itself out. In an age where every debate feels like a brawl and every disagreement turns into spectacle. What happened in that hearing room felt almost revolutionary. For once, leadership wasn't measured by volume. It was measured by presence, by steadiness, by the power to stay grounded when others lose balance. And that, more than anything, struck a chord. Across the country, people weren't celebrating a now. They were celebrating a reminder that the values once considered old-fashioned still matter. Fairness, courage, empathy, and resilience. Jasmine embodied them all, not by winning a fight, but by elevating it. She didn't humiliate a man. She humbled a mindset, one that mistakes mockery for wit, dominance for strength, and disrespect for debate. Her calm was the counterargument to an entire culture of noise. She proved that you can be fierce without being cruel, unflinching without being unkind. She proved that emotional intelligence isn't just a soft skill, it's a survival skill. People saw in her not a politician, but a reflection of themselves. Every teacher who's been interrupted midst, every professional who's been spoken over, every citizen who's been told their voice doesn't carry weight. Jasmine's victory reminded them that silence, when intentional, can be louder than shouting, and that integrity, when consistent, can outlast even the most polished arrogance. She didn't destroy Rubio, she didn't need to. His undoing came from the mirror she held up, the one that showed him, and the country, what true leadership looks like. And in that reflection, America saw something it had almost forgotten. Grace. The quiet courage to stand tall, stay kind, and never lose composure, even when mocked, doubted, or dismissed. It's the same courage that built the nation, the resilience of those who stood their ground, not through rage, but through conviction. Jasmine Crockett's moment didn't belong to partisanship or ideology. It belonged to everyone who still believes that respect should be a strength, not a liability. Her power wasn't in her title or her microphone, it was in her self-control. And that's the lesson history will remember. Because the world changes, not when arrogance wins a but when dignity wins a generation, when people see that truth, spoken calmly, carries farther than any insult ever will. When they realize that leadership doesn't require cruelty to command attention, only authenticity. In a time when shouting matches dominate the airwaves, Jasmine's calm felt radical. Her composure, her patience, her unwavering belief in purpose. These weren't just traits. They were rebellion, a defiance against the chaos that has too often defined public life. Her victory wasn't in silencing someone else's voice. It was in proving that you don't have to sacrifice decency to be powerful, because cruelty fades fast. Arrogance exhausts itself, but integrity, real, steady, grounded integrity, endures. And long after the headlines disappear and the next controversy takes its place, the image that will remain is simple: JasmineCrockett.com, under fire. Proving once again that leadership isn't about how loud you can speak, it's about how deeply your silence can make the world listen. And that was the moment. Marco Rubio, MOCKS. Jasmine Crockett, she explodes and humiliates him instantly. But what the cameras captured wasn't an explosion of anger. It was the eruption of truth, the kind that doesn't need volume to make itself heard. Jasmine's composure wasn't just her own triumph. It was a lesson for everyone who's ever been underestimated, talked over, or told to calm down. She didn't fight for applause, she fought for principle. She didn't trade insults, she traded in integrity. In a room built on performance, she proved that authenticity still has power. Her calm wasn't silence, it was command. It was the strength to let arrogance unravel under the weight of its own noise. And through that stillness, she reminded millions that dignity doesn't need permission. It demands respect. This story isn't about one senator being humbled. It's about a nation remembering that leadership doesn't require cruelty, and that conviction can live quietly but still shake the ground beneath injustice. So if you've ever been mocked for standing your ground, if you've ever felt dismissed for your calm, remember Jasmine Crockett's moment. Remember how she didn't bend, didn't break, didn't bow, she simply stood taller. Because that's how change begins. Not with shouting matches, but with people who refuse to stoop to the level of those trying to silence them. If this moment inspired you, share it, speak it, live it. Bring that same courage, that same grace, into every room that tries to shrink your voice. Because they can roll their eyes, they can interrupt your sentences, they can mock your words, but they can't match your worth.